Hey, good morning. Welcome inside Mr. Small's Theater. This is the River's Edge. I am Matt Geica, and you are immersed in Geik's Got Game. For the next hour, well, we'll call it 50 minutes. I'm unfashionably late. Blame my parents for instilling that in me. Just kidding, Mom and Dad, if you are paying attention to the show this morning. Thank you, even if you're not related to me, for joining me for this usual smorgasbord of sports and, well, big picture life and sports topics. And we're really going to get literal in that sense today. Later on in this program, I'll tell you exactly how and why in just a moment. But a lot of hockey talk coming up today. I feel like I've said that quite a bit over the course of the last few months. But, hey, Pittsburgh is a big hockey town these days. You don't need me to tell you that. So it feels like it used to feel with the Steelers, where the Steelers were 24/7, 365. Now it's more the Penguins. And maybe it's just the circles that I run in. Maybe it's because I cover hockey and I don't cover football. But I also think it's just a generational turnover. And so we're going to play to you. We're going to play to your strengths. We're going to play to your interests here on Geik's Got Game. And we should, because this is one of the most active times on the NHL calendar. You may be thinking, well, didn't the Stanley Cup just end a couple of weeks ago? Isn't it the offseason? Well, it will be the offseason really in 1 or 2 weeks. As of right now, leading into the opening of free agency on Sunday, so many rumors, so many reports, including some of our own on PittsburghHockeyNow.com, which you may have checked out already. And if you haven't, head on over there at the moment because we have plenty there for you on what the Penguins might do, what they've already done. They've brought back a couple of guys. They are reported to have come to an agreement with someone who has made many Penguins fans upset regarding this so-called agreement, which may not be finalized, but at least there is some agreement on terms. So, well, I'll get to those details in a little bit too. Also later in this hour, why the World Cup, in my mind, has surpassed the Olympics. Not an original take, no doubt. People have said this already, and I feel that the way that things are going in the sports world, it might be just easier to consume the World Cup. It may not even be the actual sporting event, but I'll give you some reasons why I think the World Cup is the premier sporting event, even if the United States isn't in it. And I've had the opportunity this time around to just watch as an unbiased observer, or well, at least I was rooting for Poland, the nation of my heritage, but they did not treat me very well. So in some ways, it was very much like my usual Team USA experience in the World Cup. Later on, at the end of the hour, Jared Wickerham, our good friend, will join me in studio. He's a freelance photographer. He's been on assignment for Pittsburgh City Paper and the Pittsburgh Current, the alternative news outlet here in town, covering the protests in the aftermath of the shooting death of Antoine Rose in East Pittsburgh and the subsequent charging of a police officer with homicide. It's been a percolating week in, I don't want to call it local politics, it's social issues, and Jared has been all over it. He's a sports photographer, I would say primarily a sports photographer, but he's done plenty of news. He shot the Boston Marathon bombing back in 2013. So he has some experience in the crossover here. This, of course, nothing to do with sports, but I'm curious to see how some of the principles that he uses to create those compelling images in the world of sport can translate over to some of the stuff that he's put forth on City Paper and the Pittsburgh Current. And I should have brought in my copy of the City Paper. I was going to, and I forgot, rushing out the door, as I mentioned, a little bit late today, but not late to get to the Pens talk. And I danced around his name a moment ago, but his name is Jack Johnson. He's a 31-year-old defenseman who played for the Columbus Blue Jackets for the past several seasons, original draft pick of the LA Kings. He was always highly regarded, probably overrated if you look at his possession numbers, if you look at some of the ways in which he failed at driving play for the teams that he played for. He's had some offensive upside, but even that has dried up in recent years to the point that, irony alert, Ian Cole, when he was dealt from the Penguins to the Blue Jackets in the spring, Cole essentially displaced Jack Johnson from the starting lineup for a Blue Jackets team that went on to make the playoffs, and I thought had a really good shot of moving on in the playoffs. We all know the Capitals beat him, but Jack Johnson was left on the outside one way or the other. And looking like a player who's going to have to sign maybe a one-year deal as he hit free agency to try to show a team something, to try to prove himself that he is still a viable NHL defenseman, even if it is a bottom pairing guy and not necessarily the top two pairing guy that we thought we might see from Jack when he was drafted more than 10 years ago. Jack Johnson is a buddy of Sidney Crosby, but I don't believe that has had that much influence in the Penguins' decision to try to bring him in. And if you saw the reports, Jason Mackey of the Post-Gazette, Mark Madden of 105.9 The X, they had it first. We confirmed it at Pittsburgh's Hockey Now. Dan Kingerski did it, in fact. I want to give him the full credit there on our site. But it looks like that the Penguins and Johnson are going to come together on a 5-year contract for a 31-year-old guy who looks like he's in total decline. If you remember Rob Scuderi, the second coming of Rob Scuderi in Pittsburgh, Jack Johnson's shot share numbers, that tells you where the shots are taken when a player is on the ice. Jack Johnson, from the looks of the numbers, played the entire season in the Blue Jackets' end of the rink. That's not good, in case you're wondering. Yeah, he can defend a little bit, he can block a few shots, but his decision-making has not been good in talking to some people who cover the Blue Jackets, who watch the Blue Jackets on a nightly basis. And basically, he's not as physically gifted as he used to be, and so those hockey sense characteristics that he used to be able to make up for by being quick, by being strong, he doesn't quite have that ability. Maybe similar to Chris Letang in some ways, but without that dynamic offensive upside. So I see no reason why the Penguins should be in on Jack Johnson. And if this is the move that Jim Rutherford is going to make, if this is the big move, first of all, I don't think it is, because he cleared cap space. He has still several million under the salary cap going into July 1st, which is Sunday. That's the start of free agency, so we look forward to that. Hockey Christmas, also doubling as Canada Day, so north of the border, they'll be locked in. You know that. If it is Johnson, though, as the primary signing, and if the Penguins aren't able to bring in, say, a Jeff Skinner, whom they've been linked to in reports from Pierre LeBrun of The Athletic, to name one, if it's not Skinner, though, if they can't make a big trade and bring in someone to help them on the wing, maybe to give Crosby someone to play with on the top line, or perhaps Evgeny Malkin as well, with Connor Sherry out, it seems like there's a space there. So I still believe the Penguins are going to make a move in that way, but if they don't, this is looking like a rough offseason, much like last year was. And I'll give Jim Rutherford some leeway, first of all, because he did so well in putting together this speed and skill-oriented team that won back-to-back cups. Of course, he was the one who signed Mike Sullivan in the 2015 offseason as a coach in waiting, perhaps, in case Mike Johnston didn't work out. Johnston didn't. Sullivan came in, and the Penguins really flourished. They blossomed. You don't need me to tell you that, but they did under Sullivan in that 2015-16 season. They repeated again. So there's a lot to say good about Rutherford and what he's done. I thought his first offseason in Pittsburgh back in 2014, not so good. But he made the adjustments. He saw where the game was going. In this way, to commit to Jack Johnson for 5 years, $3 million plus per year, it doesn't sound like a lot. And if he just plays bottom pairing minutes for the Penguins, maybe he's better than Chad Ruedel. Maybe he is. But the fact that I'm even saying maybe, or maybe he's better than Matt Hunwick was last year, who was moved on this week to Buffalo, there should be no maybe if you're committing 5 years to a guy. That's almost as bad as the salary is the term here. I thought 1, maybe 2 years, and maybe $1 or $2 million. But if the Penguins see something in him, they obviously do see something in him that they can try to inspire that to come out of him in Pittsburgh. Well, then I guess we'll have to wait on that. But as of right now, and as I wrote on Pittsburgh Hockey Now yesterday, you can only judge the decision in the moment, and all the publicly available data suggests this is a big mistake for the Penguins. So I am not alone in this assessment, even though I was accused of being on an island this morning on Twitter by at least one user of that fine website. The backlash actually was rather remarkable when this news came out. I believe it was Wednesday afternoon. I was on my way down to Louisville to call a Riverhounds soccer match. Big win for the Hounds, by the way. I'll get to that later. But just checking Twitter when I stopped at a Panera down there in Cincinnati on my way, an eruption of, for the most part, negative feedback. Hockey fans and Penguins fans, I think, have become pretty enlightened that you have to look beyond just a player's reputation. You have to look at performance. And there are so many ways now to see how a player is performing. There's really no excuse if you are a diehard fan to not be in the know about some of this stuff. You may not buy into it 100%. I don't think I buy into just looking at data 100%. There are different fits, and Justin Schultz struggled at the defensive end in Edmonton. He was still pretty good at the offensive end, but once he came to Pittsburgh, he seemed to tidy things up because the system maybe gave him a boost. Or playing around better players. Probably that was more the case in Pittsburgh that helped Justin Schultz out. But Schultz was 25 when he came to Pittsburgh, and I've seen that comparison, and I addressed it yesterday on Pittsburgh Hockey Now. Schultz was 25. Johnson's 31. Schultz was still maybe in excess of that potential that made him such a sought-after free agent coming out of the University of Wisconsin. Jack Johnson, we know who he is. This is a strange move. And for a team that's always going to spend to the cap, it seems even more mystifying. It's just weird. It doesn't fit with anything that even Jim Rutherford has done, in fact, in his tenure. He's never committed this much money to a guy who wasn't already under his roof. Now, he did give 5 years to Patrick Hornqvist this past spring, but we already know that Hornqvist is a great fit with the Penguins. He gives them something that they don't otherwise have in other spots, and he's been good. He's been performing well over the past 2, 3, 4 years, even though he is on the wrong side of 30. So there's no comparison there for me either, because the Penguins know that Hornqvist works in Pittsburgh. They don't know about Jack Johnson, and they're going to make this commitment. I'm very rarely 100% against anything, but I'm pretty close in this case. Or I'm very rarely 100% for anything. I'm always Mr. Gray Area, right? You know me and talking on this show. It's hard to really know something, especially when you're projecting performance. But in this case, I can't see a bright side here besides the fact that maybe Jack Johnson feels comfortable with a long-term deal. And, well, if you followed his past, his parents extorted money from him. It's a rough situation for him. But in this case, he would have that financial security back. He wouldn't have to worry about the year-to-year thing. From what I understand, he's pretty much past that point where his parents have hamstrung him from a financial standpoint. So maybe that'll be good. Maybe a peace of mind will help. But from what I've seen on the ice, and you know what? It's funny, going back to the 2014 playoff series between the Penguins and the Blue Jackets, it was Crosby against Jack Johnson a lot. And Crosby just destroyed his buddy Jack Johnson in that series too. So I'm not even sure if Sid has any influence. It can't be based on how Johnson's played against him, because Sid has torn him up. And Sid actually has done very well against the Blue Jackets in generating offense. So it's not like there's some special sauce in there that the Penguins want to get out of Columbus. John Tortorella soured on him. I know a lot of you don't like John Tortorella, but I think he's a pretty decent hockey coach. And I also think that Ian Cole is a better defender than Jack Johnson, whether it be starting the breakout or defending in his own zone. And the Penguins traded Ian Cole. So this doesn't add up to me. I know it doesn't add up to a lot of you. And we have seen some caveats from reporters. Mackey from the Post-Gazette, some other national reporters. I think Darren Dreger of TSN chimed in too, just to remind people that this is not a done deal, perhaps because of the blowback that they've gotten from Penguins fans who are apoplectic at this news. Again, this is not a done deal. Players can't sign. They can discuss contract terms, but they can't sign until Sunday afternoon. So is it possible that enough public backlash could convince the Penguins to get a little uneasy? I highly doubt it. I'll put that out there. To be clear, I don't believe that could actually happen. But maybe if the Penguins fan base wishes hard enough, if you pray to the right people, if you believe in the hockey gods, I suppose you could pray to them. Can you make the Jack Johnson agreement disappear? There's also the idea that maybe, and I've seen this postulated, maybe the Penguins are looking ahead to a possible NHL lockout. I know, another lockout, but it looks like it's on the horizon in a couple of years. Or the expansion draft. Seattle's coming in probably for the 2021 season. That's, 2 years down the road. Maybe they can expose him and the Seattle Totems or whatever pick him up. Or there's a new buyout rule. There's an amnesty buyout situation like we saw with the past lockout where teams can shed a contract. But that's something really, not a long shot, but it's definitely uncertain. That's something not very steady to bet on if you're Rutherford. So I don't get it. I think they could have found better value. I think they could have paid a guy a little bit more money, like Calvin DeHaan, who's out there on the market, arguably the top defenseman who's available. You could pay him a little bit more and give him some term, but he's in his late 20s. He's proven himself more than Jack Johnson. If you're going to pay a guy, make him a good guy. Don't make him a reclamation project. You can give up a little bit for a high risk, but don't give up a lot for a high risk. And that's what I see the Penguins doing right now, and I don't agree with it. I'm just going to say it right now. I'm putting my reputation on the line here maybe a little bit, but I'm going to say it's not going to work out. And even if it does work out, I still say it's a bad decision. I'm going to go that far, because we can only judge decisions right now. It's a fallacy to say we have to wait on all decisions. No, because right now the Penguins have to make this call. So we evaluate how they made the call with the information that's available right now. You can't give them the benefit of the doubt if it works out, and you can't hurt them, you can't penalize them if it doesn't work. That's not fair either, because they didn't have the benefit of hindsight in making this call right now this week. So Connor Sherry moved on to Buffalo to free up some salary. That also happened this week. Sherry, I still think has a lot of potential, but he really fits with Buffalo, and maybe the relationship between Rutherford and Jason Botterill, his former assistant here in Pittsburgh. Botterill's now running the Sabres up there. That'll help Buffalo. I could see Sherry fitting in with Jack Eichel, no doubt, on that top line up there. But you had to give, if you will, in this case. The Penguins wanted to get Matt Hunwick's contract off the books, and he was owed more than $4 million over the next 2 years. I suppose if you look at it that way, then Jack Johnson's not going to hurt you too much with the cap. But if you're just talking on the ice, it doesn't make any sense. And I feel like the Penguins have gotten worse this week. The week's not over. The summer's not over. I understand that. So something big could happen. And I think Jim Rutherford is hunting bigger game here, whether it be Jeff Skinner or Max Pacioretty. That'd be a long-term deal to pick up. Skinner's just 1 year left on his contract. Either way, if he makes that move, then yeah, I understand the machinations here. But Jack Johnson still doesn't fit. Anyway, I'll take a break here on Gike's Got Game and bring it on back to talk some World Cup. We're going from hockey to foot hockey, as Justin Bourne calls it, of The Athletic. I enjoy that characterization. There are a lot of similarities between hockey and soccer. That's why I enjoy calling both. But I'm just talking soccer coming up after this break. The World Cup is awesome, even without the U.S., and the scenes from this past week should tell you that. I think it's the best sporting event on the planet right now. I believe it has surpassed the Olympics. I'll describe to you why I feel that way after this break on the River's Edge.
According to the Oxford Dictionary, the word jagoff is defined as a noun, which means a stupid, irritating, or...
John and Rachel from the Jagoff podcast, and we are at the River's Edge.
And starting on 7/5, we will be here every Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right, so that means like we are at the River's Edge.
Right.
Here, we're inside your little computer, and we're talking all about the cool things going on in Pittsburgh.
All things Pittsburgh.
Yep.
Listen in Thursdays at 10.
The synapses are firing here at the River's Edge Studios at Mr. Small's Theater in Millvale. I didn't give Millvale a shout-out. This is Gike's Got Game. I am Matt Geica. I spent a good portion of last Saturday on a modified bar crawl down here. We're on top of the hill in Millvale, but down over the hill where there is the Grist House Brewery. That was awesome, despite being hit by some heavy thunder showers while we were in the beer garden. That wasn't so great. But then myself, my wife, my brother, and my parents, our little son Lucas, we made our way down. And no, Lucas didn't drink. He's still a few years away from that. We made our way down to Strange Roots. I'm pointing to my left. It's down by Route 28, right off the highway. And it's a place that has a lot of experimental, a lot of sours, a lot of just different types of beers, and I love it. And the food was really good, actually, too. So we had a Millvale experience, and I encourage you to come down and take a walk around. Mr. Small's Theater, as you know, the Fun House has been a part of Pittsburgh tradition, a part of the Pittsburgh music scene for forever now, and it continues to be so, always active on the weekends especially. There are some really cool murals, though, some members of music history, guys like Elvis and James Brown, and God, they're all down there. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, some really neat renditions or inscriptions, if you will, on these outdoor murals here in Millvale. So if you're looking for a place to spend some time and you don't want to get in the hustle and bustle of Lawrenceville or East Liberty or all those trendy East End spots, come on down to Millvale. It's just across the river, and I spend an hour or so here every week. But like I said, I need to be able to find my way down here a little more often, I think. That would be quite awesome. Like I said, my brain's going in a ton of different directions. I apologize if I skipped over any pertinent topics from the first segment on the lead up to NHL free agency. Actually, I do want to address one that I missed. John Tavares is the biggest name on the market. I envy him so much right now to think that you're going to get paid no matter where you go. You're going to be locked up for life. You're going to be secure for life and put your family in a great financial spot. But also just to what he's doing this week in L.A. with his agency is welcoming these teams in who want to sign him to present to him. He gives him a couple hours to extol the benefits of their team and their organization and why he'd be a great fit. To have all these people come in, these multi-million-dollar corporations, in the case of the Maple Leafs, maybe even a billion-dollar corporation, to come in and say, we need you, we want you. What a feeling that must be, a boost to the ego, for sure. Not that John Tavares needs a boost to the ego. He knows he's one of the best players in hockey, and he's known this has been coming up for a while. So I suppose for me to jump into that situation would be quite overwhelming and almost surreal in a way. Who knows? For him, it might even be. A lot of hockey players are like that, where they don't think about where they stand in society and how much money they make and how much stature they have. You have to have your head in the sand for 2 years if you're Tavares and not realize how sought after that you're going to be this summer. So once he figures out where he wants to go, and I'm rooting for Vegas because they have so much salary cap space, they can build off of this year's trip to the final. That would be terrific. All of a sudden, maybe Vegas becomes a juggernaut in the league. That would be unbelievable as an expansion team. Well, they've already gone to the final. They've already gotten 3 games away from the Cup. You could say the only way to go is down. I don't know about that. They continue to establish themselves. They add some big star names. Then they are a premier destination already, but they could make themselves even more of that. And who would have thought that 5 years ago when it was in doubt whether Vegas would be able to drum up the season ticket support to get an expansion franchise? Well, that was no trouble. That was the first sign that this thing was going well. And to pull on a player like Tavares, we've heard that George McPhee, the GM down there, has been talking with the Senators, Pierre Dorian, their GM, about Erik Karlsson, who has, 1 year left on his contract, but maybe they could sign him or trade for him and then sign him to an extension. There's all these opportunities for Vegas. San Jose would be cool too, as would Toronto, to be honest. To see Toronto just go all in, maybe give Tavares a max deal for 1 year or 2 years, while the younger stars on the Leafs are still on lower level contracts in terms of finances. That would be fun too. I think when the Leafs are good, hockey's more interesting. And, talk about a potential to be a legend, right? If you could raise the cup in Toronto and you're John Tavares, you're an Ontarian by birth. I don't know if there is a better situation. If you can handle all the scrutiny. San Jose would be a nice spot if you want to fly under the radar a little bit. And then, of course, there's always returning to the Islanders. I don't think I'd do that personally. I think it's time to move on to a franchise. It's better positioned to compete and stop wasting your prime if you're Johnny T. So once that happens, once we figure out what's going to happen, and we might not find out until Sunday or early next week, but that'll open up some things, and potentially that's what the trade market is waiting for. The Penguins have made a deal, like I said, Sherry and Humwick up to Buffalo, but that was more of a salary dump. We'll see if we see an honest player-for-player trade, like we saw with Max Domi going from Arizona to Montreal and Alex Galchenyuk back the other way. So that would be cool once we get into the teeth of NHL free agency. And as you know, in the other side of the sporting world, LeBron James' decision, he has to decide by tonight, I believe, right? Whether he wants to come back to Cleveland. I think he should go too. So I'm pulling for both of these top jewels on the respective free agent markets to go different places. Easy for me to say. I don't root for the Cavaliers or the Islanders, I suppose. Anyway, shifting gears here. And if you're just a hockey fan, I suppose I give you permission to tune out. But I'd love if you stayed with me as I talked about the World Cup. It's an awesome event. I say that because of the world scope. Obviously, it's in the name, World Cup. But also, there are some benefits to the World Cup over the Olympics. And I have found the Olympics to have lost some luster recently. Maybe I'm biased as a hockey fan because hockey didn't have the best of the best in the Winter Games this past year in South Korea. Neither here nor there, though. In terms of the Winter or the Summer Games, I love the variety. I've talked about that on this show in the past. I enjoy seeing different disciplines and meeting new faces. But I think more than that, and I've discussed this in relation to tennis and golf, I love having recurring characters, and I love getting to know the players. And you carry these histories in, like with Tiger Woods. He's playing right now at his tournament out in Washington, D.C. I have all this history personally as a fan of Tiger Woods. it adds to it. It gives me more of an investment as opposed to we're trying to cram and figure out who's going to be competing in these various events that NBC is going to be bringing my way when it comes to the Olympics. With the World Cup, we already know some of the characters. We know most of the big characters. Your Mo Salahs of Egypt, breakout star in the English Premier League. Cristiano Ronaldo, maybe the best striker of his generation, probably is. Lionel Messi, maybe the best all-around player ever. These are guys that we have watched in club soccer. We've seen them in past World Cups and international competitions, and we get to see them again at the highest stage. And these matches mean so much. Sometimes it's meant too much. But in this case, it's really cool for me to see, for instance, I believe it was the Japanese ambassador to Mexico getting hoisted up on the shoulders of Mexican soccer fans this week. Or pardon me, it was the Korean ambassador, because South Korea beat Germany to allow Mexico to advance on to the elimination round. So to see scenes like that, and I brought this up at the end of last week's show, sports can bring us together, I think, and that's why I'm in sport. It's no longer just an escape for me. I have a firm belief that sport can be a force for good in the world. And I'll continue to repeat that until the day I die. I honestly believe it. I think it can be a force for good, for keeping all of us in shape and fit, and get away from our computer screens every once in a while and participating ourselves. But even the spectator experience can make us all better. It can bring us together as communities in supporting our teams. But like we just saw, in a completely contrived situation, you'd never see a South Korean lauded in Mexico, or any other country for that matter, like the ambassador was this week, just because his soccer team from his nation helped the soccer team in the nation in which he is currently working. So that helps. The drama of it helps. It's also just one tournament to follow. It's easy to follow a tournament. And there are group stage games. It's a gradual build-up. Now we'll have elimination games coming up this weekend. So it's very simple, as opposed to learning all these different rules that the Olympics throws at you. And many times, I'll be honest, I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm leaning hard on the analysts on the TV side, or I'm leaning hard on what I read from various journalists, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to branch out and explore different avenues and different areas of interest. I think that's great and very good, but it's also a barrier for entry for a lot of people. So I think the World Cup is more accessible. I think it has more recognizable characters. We already know the sport, or at least most of us do. By this point, if you don't know the basic rules of soccer, then you're just willfully ignorant in that way. And it's just one tournament to follow. It's just one trophy at the end. And I love international competitions. It takes the best of team sports, too, in this case. You're getting the best of the best for the most part. U.S. sitting this one out, that being accepted. Yes, they were better than a couple of the teams in the World Cup, but with the field expanding, and with the U.S., Mexico, and Canada getting the World Cup in 8 years, I think it's only going to get bigger, well, literally bigger, but it's only going to get more significant in the sports world. So if the World Cup has not already surpassed the Olympics, I think it has at this point, or it is on the verge of doing so, just in terms of getting everyone in the world tuned in and locked in on one thing. And like I've said, that's a good thing. All right, when we come back, Jared Wickerham, my photog friend, he took my family photos, so I'm a little biased. He did a wonderful job with those, but he's been shooting some more important things recently. Like I said, some big news in the Pittsburgh community. He's been on the scene for a couple of different outlets here in Pittsburgh and bringing you those compelling angles and just plain compelling images that he has brought you from the world of sport. More than anything else, I want to discuss with him how that translates to news, how what he's learned from sport can just help create a compelling photo no matter what. So that's all coming up. I believe in the power of images, and obviously so does Jared. He'll be with me to wrap up the program here. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge.
Hey there, William John III here from Wake Up on Fire Productions. I want to talk to you about Yinsfest 2018. It will be at Mr. Small's on June 30th. We love the buzz that's burning in Pittsburgh's music scene right now, and we want to put on a different type of festival. We are booking over 24 musical performers who we don't think are receiving the media attention that we think they should. And we aren't leaving out poets, writers, artists, and local vendors to give you a real taste of the Pittsburgh underground. Yinsfest is Pittsburgh's music festival alternative, hosted at Mr. Small's entire campus, including the theater, the funhouse, and the brand spanking new war room. It's been exciting to watch Mr. Small's grow. It's been thrilling to witness the new talent and musicians. local businesses and writers flourish, and we want to bring it all together. Mr. Smalls, June 30th, all ages. Doors are at noon, and it goes well into the evening. Make an entire day of it. They have several full bars, they have food, they have indoor and outdoor activities. What more could you want? Come discover your new favorite band before everyone else does at Yinsfest 2018, Pittsburgh's music festival alternative.
I have company now at the River's Edge Studios. The window is open. It's a bright, sunny day. It's going to be a hot weekend, by the way, in Pittsburgh. So if you were waiting for the real scorchers, well, now July's about ready to start. We're going to enter the the time of year where you're grateful to have air conditioning. We don't have central air at my house, so I was just at a friend's house down in Kentucky, and he was saying that he was feeling blessed because they have central air down there. They can hang out. But you know what? I like to be outside anyway, so it just gives me an excuse to get out. I am Matt Geica. This is Geics Got Game, and the gentleman to my right, stage left, is Jared Wickerham. He is, well, you can find him on social, both Twitter and Instagram at WickPhoto. He's a freelance photographer. He's done a lot of sports. We've talked about sports on this show when you came in the past, and your background and what you love to shoot and all that. But you've been training the camera on some more important things, if I may say so. I know sports is important to all of us, and I'm a big advocate for sport generally. But when you're covering news, when you're covering, as I mentioned earlier in the show, you've been out on the streets of Pittsburgh covering the protests in the aftermath of the shooting of Antoine Rose, the young man from East Pittsburgh. Now the cop who did it, he was fired from his position and he's been charged with homicide. So it doesn't appear to be cooling down in any way, if you may pardon the bad pun with the weather and all. But on the streets, people have been expressing their displeasure, and you've been out there in the middle of it, trying to chronicle it for, well, a couple of different outlets, but primarily for the Pittsburgh City paper. And you brought a city paper if you want to bring that out. But how was that? I don't want to call it a transition. You've shot news before, but of course, this has probably felt like a beat for you, hasn't it, lately? And here's one of the shots.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've been out there 4 or 5 days. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of protests. It's, press conferences and a little bit of everything. But yeah, it's an interesting time for sure. And, this isn't just a Pittsburgh problem. It says a Pittsburgh problem, but it's not. It's very much a problem. It's a social problem across the states at the moment. So,
well, it's a Pittsburgh problem now, most personally.
Right.
I don't think we've had any situation like this, at least to this scope in Pittsburgh, where it's become such an event, and people have, in some cases, what was most arresting to me was the stoppage of traffic on the Parkway East. That's a community saying, pay attention to what's going on. And I know there was a lot of controversy about whether that was productive or not. For me, protests is about making people uncomfortable. I understand if you're a trucker trying to make your rounds or whatever, that can hurt your pocketbook. But I can't say that I blame anybody for that. And that probably created well, how did you cover that whole situation? Because I'm sure that was quick developing and maybe not planned.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it wasn't planned on my part. I mean, they didn't tell us what they were doing.
Yeah.
We started in East Pittsburgh. That was I believe the first protest I covered.
Mm-hmm.
And they had one in East Pittsburgh the day before, but just kind of hung around the police station. We actually walked all the way from East Pittsburgh through Forest Hills, essentially into Wilkinsburg, and jumped on the 376 right at the Wilkinsburg exit. And yeah, it was very much not planned, and they weren't sure where they were going, and they ended up there until 3 a.m. They
Mm-hmm.
arrested one woman. She refused to leave, but it was a peaceful arrest, and so she's an activist in the area, and that's what she wanted out of it. But yeah, it's I mean, the 376 shutdown, regardless of how you feel, certainly gets the attention of a lot of people who may not pay attention to the news as closely as most. There were a couple of truck drivers who were interviewed, and they said, "Oh yeah, we hadn't heard about this." Mm-hmm. And here they're stuck there for 4 or 5 hours, and they were had a good attitude about it and said, we're here, and we understand why they're doing it. And, so, yeah, there's always going to be people who feel one way, strongly one way or the other. Certainly with with Twitter, with everything we've shared, I've kind of seen both sides of it for sure. And but yeah, it's such a huge issue today, regardless of whether you're in Pittsburgh or not. And it's interesting because I I haven't covered this in any other city, but from watching the other coverage in cities like Ferguson and Pittsburgh, this group of protesters, these people are very close to the situation, and it's not a bunch of people kind of jumping on a bandwagon or doing it because it's the thing to do or it's whatever. They're there because they truly believe in change, and so I think that's kind of what's made this a little different. It's a little more emotional, but everyone has remained peaceful. Really, the only incidents that have really occurred because of outsiders. People who were stuck in traffic, who weren't happy.
Mm-hmm.
There was a tow truck driver the other night that climbed out in the north side, got on his truck.
Saw that, yeah.
And yelled some racial obscenities, and essentially I think got arrested for inciting a riot, which if the police hadn't been there, it wouldn't have been pretty.
Might have been arrested for his own protection in that case.
For sure, yeah.
So when you're out there, this is not like sports. You're not in a photo well. You're not constricted to the sideline. You're basically you're on the playing surface, if you want to make a comparison here. So how do you handle that as a technician? What are you looking for? Angles, lighting, I'm sure that's all factored in. Yeah,
it's a lot of the same concepts are involved, right? It's fast moving. It's especially these protests at night. It's low light. It's not great situations, and just like sports, you kind of have to have your head on a swivel. These protesters jumped on 376, and what are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
On 376 with them,
Yeah.
So you got to be smart about it. And there was a Mercedes that tried to plow through some protesters the other night. Another time where you need to always be paying attention, and you can't just assume that because the police are there and you've blocked off, these protesters have blocked off the street that you're then safe. Because there are people who want to get home and, and do what they do. So, it's... So
you're looking out for your own well-being.
Yeah, and there's...
In addition to...
Right.
Doing your job.
Right. And the well-being of everybody else. I think, that's one big thing and an important thing about doing these events is that who's covering it with you. It's been, Andy Russell and Nate Smallwood from the Trib and Michael Santiago and Jesse and all these other people from the PG, and you look out for each other. You make sure that, you're staying hydrated and you're getting something to eat, and that you're not putting yourself in a dangerous situation. So it's, and the protesters, look out for everybody as well. They're offering us water, and we had one the other morning, and there were, donuts and bagels, and they were like, hey, just have whatever. And, so they understand that, we're there to, we're telling both sides of the story, but at the same time, we're there in that moment to tell theirs. And so they very much understand that, that we're there to help them and get their message across however we can. But, we obviously have to tell both sides of the story. So,
Jared Wickerham is my guest on Gike's Got Game. We're very tangentially attaching this one to sports just because Jared has done so much sports work, but he's been shooting the Antoine Rose protests for a variety of outlets. We brought in the city paper though to show off some of the work. You're working in tandem with the reporter Ryan, correct?
Yep.
Is it Dedo or Dito?
I think it's Dito.
I put you on the spot. You may not even know. Yep. It's one of those names you see in print but you don't hear pronounced. I'm sure that happens to people regarding my name too at times. But how are you working in tandem with him? Well, what's the communication like? Does he have ideas, or do you sometimes perhaps report as well. You've done that in the sports realm. I don't know if people realize, but photographers do pass tips along to the so-called reporters. So are you doing that in this case too?
Yeah, I mean, just like sports, if you're stuck up in the press box and I'm in the photo well, I'm able to see, an injury or something else that's going on. There was a funny moment, I guess, the other day where Ichiro Suzuki was in the dugout in costume. And the
I didn't see that. Okay.
Actually took a photo and reported that to his writer. He's now an executive and he wasn't allowed to be in the dugout, which was why it was.
What kind of a costume was he in?
He was wearing a hat and he had a mustache on, and it was like a Bobby Valentine all over again.
Yes, it is.
But so it's a little bit of both. I mean, Ryan can't be out there at all times, and I certainly can't be either. So if he sees something, he'll let me know, and I try and live tweet some things and tell people what's going on and where the protesters are, and kind of set the scene for people who aren't there. So I mean, much of the reporting is shared, and we have certain people and sources helping us out to let us know what's going on when and where, and Facebook Live is such a huge part of that. I mean, everybody is sharing this video live, so even if you can't be there or you're curious, whether or not it's something you need to head out to, get on Facebook Live and see for yourself. And so that's been a huge part of all of this, especially if you're walking downtown and trying to figure out where everybody is, and pull it up on your phone and figure out what intersection they're on. So.
Well, yeah. Are you just rolling with it right now? You were mentioning when you came in off air that you have to be cognizant because some politicians may just be putting on, I don't want to call them artificial events, but de facto campaign rallies, you know what I mean, surrounding this thing. So you're chasing the news, but you don't want to be, I suppose, too eager to cover everything that's surrounding this.
Sure.
Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be... obviously, there's the breaking news aspect of it, right? And that's really easy to get caught up into. But if I think what Ryan and I are really working on now is kind of different angles and a different way of looking at the situation, and finding different stories to tell from that are a little more in depth than just a few hundred people showed up to protest tonight. So,
right.
It's important to tell, and certainly that's the way of them getting their message across. But there's also some important stories to really tell with these people involved. So,
what are some other news events, news coverage events that you've been a part of in the past? I know with the Boston Marathon in 2013, that's the one that comes to mind, but that was a sports event as well. So, have you had that much where it's just plain news, just straight up?
Yeah. I mean, when I first started, I did a lot, and Boston was certainly a little more newsworthy on the national scale than Pittsburgh. I think one of the first events I did was actually, and when I lived in Boston working for Getty, was the Sandy Hook school shooting, because that's not all that far from Boston.
Right. Yeah.
And there's various other things. Some are not as photo, great for pictures. There was like a meningitis outbreak at a facility outside of Boston.
What do you do for that? Shoot a doctor checking out a patient?
Yeah, you go and photograph the facility and see who comes in and out. It's not always as picturesque as a group of protesters coming across the Clementi Bridge. So.
I love this one of the protesters sitting in front of the home plate rotunda at PNC Park. I don't know if the folks watching saw that one, but I'm holding that one up now if you're just listening on the feed.
Yeah,
that was a cool one too.
That was the extra innings game, and they pretty much shut down most of General Robinson and Tony Dorsett Drive. But yeah, it's there's certainly more events on the smaller scale, news events, and that's kind of how I started. But there's a lot of crossover. Like I said, it's and news and sports kind of complement each other in some ways, because after covering something like Boston Marathon and essentially the 10-12 days that followed the bombings, it was very much you question yourself and you're like, why do I shoot sports for a living? Like, what difference am I making shooting sports?
Right. Well, I've had that same debate with myself internally. Why do I spend so much time on this? Could I be making a difference elsewhere? So yeah.
Right. And that's exactly what I started to ask myself when I started covering these topics that were certainly at the time seemed way more important than a Red Sox game.
Mm-hmm.
But it was because of those horrific events that made me kind of realize and see what sports did to help people get through those times.
Well, yeah, in Boston it was huge with the Sox and David Ortiz and the Bruins.
Well.
Yeah, right.
Yep, the Pens were actually supposed to play the Bruins.
Yeah, they were in Boston that morning.
Yep, the night that they found Sarnev in the boat. So I think that made me realize what a difference that made in people's lives when they can escape to sports. And it's not just when some big event happens, right? We all have stresses in our lives, and sports helps us get through those things. And on a much smaller scale more often than not. And I think you get more feedback from covering these news events from people. I think you see more so the difference that you're making. People are very appreciative of you telling these stories, which is always, nice to hear, especially after a long week or a long night or whatever. But
yeah,
and you don't really hear that in sports from people. You don't hear from. I mean, I know when I was a kid, I had certain photos hung up on my wall, but I wasn't contacting the photographer and saying, "Oh, hey, like."
No, and it's
your
easier
photo
now to do that.
Inspired me to do this, and but so you don't hear it as often in sports, but when you do, it's nice to know that you are telling these stories. And I think as some of these players and athletes get older, you get some emails and phone calls from people who are like, oh my, I'd love this. I have this photo of me, and most of these guys only play for a very short period of time, so these images that you're getting are important to them, if no one else.
Right, they use that in their den or in their house or whatever, just as a remembrance of a really cool time in their lives. But you're right about the news aspect, and I've done very limited news, and the rewarding nature of it, it's very, it's automatic in that way, because a part of covering news is, we always hear it too, comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And that first part, to comfort the afflicted, that's rewarding when you can get someone's story out there. Or even I've covered some, you could call them smaller time sporting events. It wasn't small time in the life or in the perspective of the people involved, but for them to feel like, oh, we got our word out and you were a part of that and that was great. In a lot of ways, I miss that when I'm just talking about what the Penguins are doing, what the Pirates are doing, or what the Steelers are doing, because they don't need my help to get the word out. They're going to get the word out on their own. So, and that's why I've also gravitated to PR over the years too, because that's also providing a megaphone, and that's why that part of it has appealed to me too. So, it all intermingles: news, sports, PR, journalism. There are certainly similarities across the spectrum there. So. Where should we can look for more of your work? I'd imagine you've done a lot for the city paper here, right?
Yeah, so I'll probably continue telling the story through them, and Ryan and I will do some stuff, and we also had a columnist do a piece as well. So there's a lot of really great work coming out of there. So
and you share some very compelling images as well on Twitter, on Instagram. So there's a sampling there for you.
Yep.
Wick Photo is where you can find it if you can't see the little chyron below him on the screen if you're not watching, if you're just listening. WICK photo. Simple as that. No spaces, no underscores. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always good to catch up.
For sure.
He's about to hit the river. He's going to go paddleboarding, I think, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's 90 degrees.
Look at you. Yeah.
I've been covering this stuff, so I need an escape every once in a while,
yes,
too.
An escape from the person who usually helps provide an escape. That sounds like fun. I've done paddleboarding once. It's extremely difficult, so I'd like to try it again. I consider myself to be a weekend warrior, no doubt. Sometimes a weekday warrior, too. I try at least. So that's Jared. You can see his work, like I said, at the various places we mentioned. Tyler Zelenko has been producing the entirety of today's show. The hour of Geiks Got Game, give or take. So a round of applause to him. This is Matt, reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. I'll talk to you next week. Same time, same place, same network, The River's Edge, bringing you Gike's Got Game every Friday morning.